I'm gonna walk all over you.
Chair recognizes Representative Sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. My amendment is quite simple. This discusses the fight that we just had on the motion to reconsider. My amendment is to strike the Simpson Amendment, Amendment number 2. I would move passage.
No.
Representative Phillips, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
Do you yield, Mr. Sheets?
I'll yield.
Okay, Mr. Sheets, I just want to talk with you a little bit and ask some questions. Do you understand? I mean, you understand that we have 16 regions? Is that correct?
Worst thing we ever did.
Is that
yes,
correct?
sir. It's one of the worst things we've ever done.
No. And do you understand that Region C, which you're in, has decided that they wanted to build lakes, but they don't want to inconvenience their citizens, and they've decided to go outside of their region to build lakes. Is that correct?
It's still in the state of Texas, sir.
I'm just asking you about the region, but that's correct. Is that right?
It's still in the state of Texas, sir.
Is that a yes? I don't understand this.
It's still in the state of Texas, sir.
Is it outside of the region?
Sure.
Okay. And so, I don't know if you understand. Do you know that I've got 2 lakes that are being built in my county? Do you understand that?
I understand that, yes, sir.
And do you understand that there's not a citizen in Fannin County that has a right to have any say over the running of that lake? Do you understand that?
I understand that.
And does that not bother you that the people and your folks can vote to remove the board of directors if they're doing something wrong, but that my citizens who have to live around the lake have no authority to do that?
When we're talking about the amendment before us right now, the two-thirds requirement in order for us to develop water so that the Dallas region and the Fort Worth region can all have the water supply we need is an onerous requirement that's unnecessary.
Would you please answer the question?
I am answering the question.
No. Do you understand the reason why we want this is so that you can't just come in and take it without having a good negotiation so we can say, hey, what? And do you know what my county...
Members, we need order in the House. There's difficulty hearing the front and back mic.
So in my county, Mr. Sheets, in my county, I don't mind talking to Mr. Larson but in my county, if the region would work with them and say, hey, this is what you'll get. You're going to be able to get some water. We'll give you a vote on the board so that if your citizens are complaining that there's problems with the lake, there's problems with the management of the lake, you can have some say in it. That's all we're asking for. We want to be able to have a seat at the table. And right now, because of you standing there and saying, we have all the population, we have all the money, you little counties, 5,000 or less, you just go raise millions of dollars to fight us. Or better yet, why don't you go out there and build it yourself and then we'll buy it? But that's not what you're doing.
Well, the reality of what you're talking about with the Simpson Amendment is that we will never be able to develop any water supplies.
That is not true. That is not true.
No region is going to let us develop water outside of our region.
That is not true because currently Fannin County has approved and Lake Ralph Hall has been permitted as the first lake permitted in 50 years, and the county commissioners approved it. If you work with them, they'll do it. But if you just
you said the little guys didn't have a say. Apparently they do because you're saying right now they have a say.
No, they don't have a say.
Well, that's what you just said.
No, they approved it showing good faith, Mr. I understand you don't know anything about this process except for the fact that you want to win because you have the might, and that's not right.
No, it's not that I want to win. It's that I want to make sure that the residents that live in District 107 and the residents that live all over the North Texas region, and when we're talking about Bexar County, and let me finish, and we're talking about other regions of the state, we need to make sure that we have the water that we need.
Do you realize, Mr. Sheets,
we are one state, sir.
Do you realize, Mr. And I agree with that. And we got to work together, but you don't want to work together because you want to do it yourself. Do you realize our farmers and ranchers, they don't have water treatments? Their grass isn't all green because they know the value of water. If y'all would put some good planning in and restrictions and take care of conservation, maybe you wouldn't need to take as much of our water, Mr. Sheets. That's what Dallas needs to do. That's what the Metroplex, they need to follow Bexar County. You keep talking about Bexar County? Follow their model. They've done an excellent job. When are you going to institute Bexar County's, and Mr. Larson's right behind that, taking care of water in their region? You need to do the same.
And we've been doing that, sir. We've been
Then
passing
why
water
do you need more and
conservation
more of our
acts
lakes?
because our region is growing, sir.
Madam Chair.
Mr.
And I
White,
would
for what
also add
purpose?
that Region C is the highest water conserving
Not at
district
this
out of
time.
all the regions right now.
Yield,
I'll yield.
Gentlemen yield for
Do
questions.
you yield, Mr. Sheets?
Yeah, I yield.
Gentlemen, yield.
Kenneth, are you familiar with the district that I represent?
I am not, sir.
Okay. I probably have more surface water than any state house district in this state. Okay? And this is not a game. This is serious business.
It
what
is
you're
serious
doing here.
business,
Because
sir.
let me ask you something. Do you understand the agreements and the understanding that people in East Texas have with the rest of the state? Do you understand the agreements?
I do understand those
Okay,
agreements, sir.
what are those unwritten agreements? That we have water districts and we have these regional planning districts and that individuals offer compensation and that there's engagement. Now look, we're going to have a vote and you're going to probably win the vote. But I want you to think about this because I don't know if you're familiar with the calls and questions I've been receiving from back home. Are you familiar with them?
Well, it's your office, sir.
Okay, let me tell you something. Let me tell you my offer, Mr. Sheets. We have seen the bills and amendments that have hit this floor with water grids and all other types of schemes. And I want you to know that people are watching and they don't like it. So you're going to have your vote today. Go ahead and have your vote.
Well, I'll tell you, people are watching, and people are watching in my district. And why do you think we came aware of this amendment that was added? It's because we were getting calls from back home.
Okay.
Our residents are watching this as well. So it's not just...
Representative Sheets, I understand that. And I've watched what has occurred in Northeast Texas. So I'm just saying this. Don't you think it is right when you're dealing with people's water and property rights that they have a seat at the table? If you don't want water districts, that's fine. We can just have the state be one entire water district. Bring the bill to the floor and vote on it.
Well, I will tell you right now, if you want to talk about having a seat at the table, let's do it in an open, transparent way. Let's
This
not
is
have
open.
a two-thirds
This is open.
requirement.
We had a vote.
Let's not have a two-thirds requirement
sir,
that will
the
make it
amendment
onerous
was on
and
the floor.
impossible for us to do what we need to do.
The amendment,
House come to order.
The amendment was offered. I miss votes. I know there have been people out eating lunch and watching the weather and looking at fireworks and everything. I understand that. But this was done in the right way.
Let's just keep it on water.
And that's fine. I don't disagree with that. And what we're doing is being done the right way. And I will also tell you that two-thirds requirement is onerous and is unreasonable, and we will never be able to get a project done to make sure that our growing regions are able to develop water.
Mr.
Speaker,
Mr. Simpson, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for a question?
Mr. Sheets, do you yield for questions?
Mr. Sheets,
I yield.
this affects all the state. It could happen to you. It just says you can't plan and fund a project in someone else's district without their consent. It doesn't require for unanimous consent. I would even take an amendment to bring it down to just a majority of the board. But don't just force it. We're not saying we don't want to provide it. We'd like to. Normally we have an abundance in East Texas. But we don't want to be forced to go against our constituents when the environmental studies show that it's going to have a very negative effect. Do you want us to ruin the environment and our own economic development simply because you want to do it by force?
And the TCEQ takes care of that during the permitting process. And you know what? I will tell
And
you
the Clean
that
Waters
let
Act's
me
gonna
answer.
require that
We
you
don't
take
want to
about
be held
500,000
hostage, Mr.
acres.
Simpson. And a two-thirds requirement is holding us hostage.
Oh, I'll take an amendment to change it to the simple majority if you want to go that far.
You should have thought of that when you brought your first amendment. The amendment before us today is to strike your amendment.
I'll be happy to accept it.
I won't. I know. And it's not my bill. It's your bill.
That's right, and I think it's a good one. And if you think it's unreasonable that it require two-thirds, Why don't you offer a
And
simple
why?
majority?
How come your bill didn't even make it out of committee, Mr. Simpson?
Well, it made it to the floor and it's passed and it's on the bill.
No, it was passed as an amendment. Why didn't your bill make it out of committee, Mr. Simpson?
Well, there's people like Mr. Larson that want to establish a grid to make a trans-Texas corridor for water to come and take it. And I don't want to do that. And
You
he's
can throw out
opposed
the
to this.
buzzword
This
trans-Texas
simply
corridor all
requires
you want.
consent,
We're
does
talking
it
about
not?
water.
That's funny.
We're talking about water, Mr. Simpson.
This
We're
just
talking about
simply
a vital
desires
resource
consent
for
to
all
plan
Texans.
and fun. And anybody, yeah. And it could be Mr. Desautel's district on the coast. It could be yours. All it simply requires that if you're going to plan a project and fund it in another district, you require consent. That's all we're asking.
And I understand that, and I disagree. And as you can see, that there's several members up here that disagree with you as well.
But just because you disagree doesn't mean you should take fundamental property rights, our economic development, our environment.
Your property rights aren't being taken away from you, Mr. Simpson.
Well, when you plan,
You still have due process, Mr. Simpson.
Representative Kraus raises a point of order. The gentleman's time's expired. The point of order is well taken and sustained. Chair recognizes Representative Simpson to speak against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a do unto others as you would have them do unto you amendment. This applies for the whole state. It's not simply for East Texas. Times could change, technology could change, and people might want to take things from Dallas-Fort Worth or from Beaumont or Houston. We provide trees. We provide a lot of things with our farms. And if we're going to give up our property to provide water, we'd like to be able to do that. Normally we have an abundance, but we just don't want to be forced into doing it. We want to have a seat at the table. We want to do it with mutual cooperation. And so I ask you, please, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and to vote against this motion to strike the amendment from this bill. Remember, just a few years ago, we had a trans-Texas corridor. Mr. Larson has a bill that would like to impose a trans-Texas corridor for water. And if they want to come take our water, fine. I'd like to work that with them. But I just want to do it with consent. And most of the time, we have plenty of water to share. Dallas-Fort Worth went to Oklahoma and was going to buy the water. And then they wanted to move it up a little bit out of the Red River, and the Supreme Court said no when Oklahoma said, well, you got to do it in the Red River. They were willing to do it with Toledo Bend and to buy it.
Mr. Speaker.
But it was very costly. They wanted to come to East Texas and take not only our water, but our land and all the mitigation land that would be required.
That's right. Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Simpson, to yield.
I'd be happy to yield.
Thank you.
For a question.
Mr. Simpson, we talked about this. I think that there was a possibility that we would have had this debate on the bill I offered earlier. And my concern and what I spoke to you and I spoke to Representative Phillips about is what you're offering to do now. Thank you. What you're offering to do now will deviate how we permit and plan for water in the state of Texas substantially.
That is not correct.
And let me explain why.
No, it's reaffirming and restoring the intent of the regional water plans.
I understand
that each water planning area would plan for its environment, for its property, for its economy. And not just give way to someone else's district.
Representative,
without
do you understand
this,
now
and
that
seeing what the Texas Water Development Board has done,
sir, that the TCEQ in its permitting process will review whether or not a project is in the state water plan. So this does only not apply for funding from the Water Development Board.
Consent,
those two agencies have become symbiotic in their operations. So
we don't want bureaucrats, 3 here in Austin, or the TCEQ being the primary people representing each district. we do.
And on the
the
merits
people
of
on
what
these
you're
regional
doing,
planning boards
if we were to
do.
have this bill, your amendment, in front of the Natural Resources Committee, this would have been a 15, 20-hour committee hearing with tens of, or not hundreds of witnesses. This is a major overhaul and change.
No, it's not. It's restoring the original intent that was changed when there was a very expensive lawsuit and that we're in dire chances of happening again if this does not go on. And it might not just be East Texas. It could be another area of the state.
TCEQ and the Water Development Board. I don't have a dog in this fight in terms of my region, in terms of my area, but I will tell you, as a 8-year member of the Natural Resources Committee, this is a major piece of legislation that should stand on its own.
No, this just restores the original intent
East
of
Texas
the regional water planning
will affect the
process.
rest of our state in planning and permitting.
No, it does not change any of that.
It absolutely
just requires consent. If you're going to build a project and fund it with state money and someone else's
you are
region.
increasing the bar to get into the state water plant in a substantial way by requiring someone who wants to negotiate many times in good faith.
You couldn't impose it on someone else and required that we work it out. And the way we worked it out is the Water Development Board imposed Region C on Region D.
And if we want to have that debate, and it probably has great merit, it should be on a standalone piece of legislation, because your simple consent will change substantially and deviate substantially how we currently permit and plan for major water projects in our state. That's what I'm saying. And that's the conversation I had with you, and that's the conversation I had with... regardless, we do not have a consent portion in our permitting process at TCEQ. If the environmentals check out, if the water availability models check out, then that's how we do it.
And our region's done that.
We need consent has merit.
It's going to negatively affect our environment and our economies.
From a third party that is
when you use eminent domain to take someone's property, you're effectively legalizing theft. And we want to do it voluntarily.
Okay. I don't know how many eminent domain cases you've been involved in. I've been involved in many. Just compensation, there is plenty of safeguards to provide just compensation to the property owners. Many times, 90% plus, those property owners settle.
Don't just impose your project and fund it with state to do it in our district. Someone else might do it in your district.
It is
I'm just asking you to do unto others as you would do unto them. It simply restores the intent
of the
original state water regional plan.
And I'm willing to have that debate with you on a standalone piece of legislation that should go through the committee. If we were to try to have in another context an amendment of this magnitude that should on its merit stand on its own to be debated, as is the process in the state legislature, I doubt very highly that any other of the committees would stand for that. The same members of those committees would be at the back mic saying, hey, we didn't get to vet this. This didn't go through the process.
This just restores and affirms our regional planning process. I urge you to vote against the motion to strike this amendment. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Will the gentleman yield for question?
Mr. Simpson, do you yield for Mr. Phillips?
Yes, I yield.
I just want to make sure, basically, what we just heard from Mr. Lucio and what we're hearing up there is that we really don't have any say locally. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a state up to Austin to decide what happens.
That's what I believe he was saying, is let a few bureaucrats determine if our property in East Texas or their property someday
it doesn't matter where it is. It may be the shoe's going to be under the foot someday.
Could be Beaumont, could be in South Texas to take, well, we need this or that, and we're just going to come take it. When we need things in other parts of the state, we come and take them voluntarily. We take them with their consent if we don't have them in East Texas.
But just clear, what you're doing is going to make it clear that there's not going to be bureaucrats deciding this. It's going to be the people that live in the region working with the other region that's coming in.
The people that have been appointed to represent them in that region. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Larson to speak for the amendment.
Folks, this is exactly what's wrong with Texas right now. In 1997, when Senate Bill 1 passed, we balkanized our state. We partitioned it into 16 regions. We no longer act like Texans. You saw the East Texas contingent stand up, and they talked about a whole separate part of the state should not follow the same rules the balance of the state uses. They would like to set up a process to when anybody wants to develop a water resource in that area to bring to the population centers or to deal with industrial needs, that they would be required to have 2/3 of the folks on the planning district agree with that. It will never happen. We fight each other fiercely along these boundary lines that were set up by the government in 1997. I thought we were all Texans. When I hear people on the back mic talk about ours and yours, we don't hear that when you talk about resource sharing, whether it be on the highways, on whether you have a devastating hurricane that blows into East Texas and the state spends $1.3 billion dealing with the aftermath of that. We're all Texans. But when we start talking about water, all of a sudden there's the Commonwealth of East Texas and then the balance of the state. It's intolerable for us to fight each other like this based on resources that are needed in communities that are growing. We're proud of the population surge, but I'll be damned if we're going to step up and deal with the responsibility of that. This is a horrible amendment for the development of our state economically and in dealing with the sustainability of our state. So it's important that we defeat this amendment. I understand and can empathize with the folks in East Texas about some of the concerns they have. All of their property the property rights are being denied by landowners that would like to sell water and move it into population areas. Well, this amendment would restrict that because you would have to go through the boundary that's being set up with 2/3 of those folks are 2/3 of those folks would have to agree on the planning district. Don't continue to perpetuate something that has stymied our state over the last couple of decades.
Mr. Turner, for what purpose?
Would Mr. Larson yield for a question?
Mr. Larson, do you yield for a question?
Please.
Gentlemen.
We need to vote yes on the Sheets amendment.
Hey, I'm sorry, did you yield?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Larson. You know more about water policy, you probably forgot more about water policy than I'll ever know, but is it fair to say that the Simpson amendment, the amendment we're about to consider stripping from the bill, would that represent a radical departure in our state water planning policy?
It would completely transform it. When you would have to have the consent of a regional planning group to agree to develop a water resource that would be outside that boundaries. And it's not the Dallas-Fort Worth area that would be impacted. It's every community in our state
it's the entire
that would
state,
be adversely impacted.
It's the entire state that would be adversely affected, is it not? And we heard some comments on this microphone a few moments ago about how folks in Dallas and Fort Worth, waste all this water in their yards. But did you know, Mr. Larson, that City of Dallas, City of Fort Worth, City of Arlington, City of Grand Prairie, Plano, Frisco, Mesquite, they all have significant watering restrictions on residential use of water and commercial use of water?
They have a great campaign, the Lawn Whisperer, in dealing with conservation. They spent $2 million changing the mindsets of folks throughout the Metroplex area that it's cool to have a lawn that's brown. It doesn't have to be green. And they transformed the thinking of the folks in the Metroplex area. They've got a very aggressive conservation measure in dealing with turf watering. And San Antonio and other communities have embarked down that same path.
I know San Antonio does the same. And did you know that even though we're in the 4th wettest spring on record in North Texas, those watering restrictions are still in place? They've not been lifted just because we've been blessed with a lot of rain this year. Right. We're still serious about conservation in
Best
North Texas.
Water management practices don't wait for a trigger on a reservoir or groundwater. Right. Have it year-round, regardless of whether it's raining or not.
And I appreciated your comments about we're all Texans, we got to do what's best for the state. It reminds me of the debate last night on the TWIA bill. We passed a bill to protect the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, to strengthen it. Did that bill pass with just coastal members voting for it?
Well, you're correct. You're correct.
I think it passed. I know I voted for it, and I'm from North Texas. I think members from all across the state supported that because our coast is important to our entire state, just as every part of our state is important. And I agree with you on this amendment to repeal the Simpson Amendment.
Well, thank you, sir. Members,
Mr.
House Bill
Mr.
632 by
Mr.
David Simpson
Will the
was
member yield
never
for a
voted out of committee, and he's submitted that bill onto this on this amendment. So the committee didn't feel like it warranted support. I don't think that the balance of the floor needs to as well.
Mr. Speaker, will the
Springer,
gentleman
for
yield
purpose.
for a question?
Yes, I will.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative Larson. You know, one thing that struck me is you sort of said we're all in this together, but you know, there's been numerous times this session where that really hadn't been the truth. That you know, I know that I think you're probably aware. I raised the point that when it came to economic development, that 30% of the population ought to get 20% of the money, so we could share in that. And that was strongly argued against by this same body that now wants to argue, well, we've got to be able to make sure that all Texans are taken care of. And I feel a little bit of hypocrisy. Do you not in that?
I don't recognize that as part of this discussion. The discussion is resource-driven based on
right.
water that would be available.
Is it not the resources of the state of Texas? When we're going to give taxpayer monies to certain areas, that's a resource, and we're not willing to share that with the whole state of Texas.
The lifeline of every population center is its water. And when we start depriving one area from having water from an area that's water rich, I think it's irresponsible for us to even consider a policy that would allow that to happen.
If I'm not mistaken, on TWIA last night, well, I voted for it, and I know I'm far away from the coast. I don't think you voted for TWIA and being able to support that. So you made that decision last night that you had an issue with it that said, I don't think that my district should belong in that to be able to augment that. So that's the same decision we're making here today.
I think there's a contrast, quite a contrast based on water resources versus on, you're talking about resources that are voted for on the floor of the House.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for a question?
Mr. Larson, do you yield?
Yes, I will.
Gentleman yields.
Representative Larson, let me ask you this. Without Representative Simpson's amendment, basically how would this process go?
Well, what it's done in the past is folks go in and develop water projects. And most of the time there is the private property owners obviously have to facilitate those projects by either selling them water rights or selling them property. I think Representative Lucio talked about permits and funding from the state level. All of it's wrapped up within the state water planning, and you have to have, the region has to approve that water project for them to access the funding.
And so right now, they do have to do it in cooperation with the area they're getting the water from.
Representative Simmons raised a point of order. The gentleman's time's expired. Point of order is well taken and sustained.
Members encourage you to support Representative Sheets'
Chair
amendment on
recognizes
this.
Representative Schaefer to speak in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is less about sharing and more about taking. And we want to talk about the spirit of Texas. It also deals with a representative form of government where the minority rights are not overrun. We also recognize that when you have a dense population that wants to exercise political muscle, that they don't go out into the rural areas of the state and just say, this is the plan that we're going to put on you. They're very clear and transparent about what they're trying to do. They're saying, we're going to put this project into your region without your consent. They've said it very clearly here. Without your consent, we're going to put it there. So I just want you to think about that. That's the spirit of Texas. It's not to just use your political muscle and take the dense populations and take the resources of those with less. Our rural areas have a vital stake in this state, in our future, in our growth. Is it going to be growth at any cost? Is that what it means? Growth at any cost in the Dallas-Fort Worth area? Is that what it means? That's not the spirit of Texas. This is not about sharing. This is about taking.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Frank, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield?
Mr. Schaefer, do you have
I
a
will
question?
yield for
Mr. Schaefer, I hate to go to the back mic on you, but if you're a property owner in East Texas, will Mr. Simpson's amendment make it easier to sell your land or harder to sell your land?
It will mean that you will have a stake in the process. It means you will be able to work with your regional planning representatives to determine your future.
And if your regional planning representatives don't agree with your decision to sell your land, I mean, do you think you should have to get approval of your regional planning people to sell your land?
I think that the private property owners in East Texas have a much better chance of having their rights respected by working with people that represent them locally than they do with people who do not have the same vested interest that they do to the west.
Well, I believe Representative White said it best when he said if we did this as the state of Texas, that we would all be a whole lot better off. When we separated the state into the different regions, then we set up continuing fights like this on the House floor again and again and again, and I hope that we will consider doing an interim study to get some of this worked out. Thanks.
I think there's a lot of study that could be done on this, but consent to a project where you live makes a lot of sense to me.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
Representative Schaefer, who owns the water in the state of Texas and has owned the water for the last 200 years?
Depends on which type of water you're talking about.
Surface water.
It's owned by the state of Texas.
Owned by the state of Texas.
And who owns the surface of the land?
And who grants the permits for the people to use it? The surface water of Texas.
The land, the surface land, is owned by private citizens.
There you go.
And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a new resource.
If you transfer the ownership of the water to a region, then you have transferred the state's assets to a region. That is fundamentally what we're talking about.
That's simply not the case. We have junior water rights and senior water rights.
That is what we're talking about. Is that not what we're talking about?
That's not what we're talking about.
Transferring the state's assets from the state's assets to a region.
Absolutely not. You're talking about the creation of new reservoirs. That's where they're going with this. We're talking about flooding people's land.
Chair recognizes Representative Phillips to speak in opposition to the amendment.
I know I've said enough on this in a lot of areas, but I want to talk about somebody who's an Aggie. His name's Thump Witcher. His family has had farmland for generations in Fannin County. It's going to be flooded. And until you visit families who are losing their land and having to give it up at no choice of their own, maybe you'll know why we're passionate about this. It's gone. So this is not something that's just in a theory to protect people in a city. This is thinking about people who are real Texans. We are Texans, Mr. Larson. We divided in 16 regions. Those regions need to work together. Right now, there's no reason why your region or any other region would have to work with mine if they can get bureaucrats in Austin to make a decision to build reservoirs. I think we need to fix this. They're building a lake, 2 lakes in Fannin County. They built a lake in Delta County. They've got plans to build 2 more lakes. That's the 10th smallest county in the state. They said, oh, you'll have all this recreation. The Corps won't let them build around Lake Cooper. It's oftentimes a mud hole. It's just filling and silting back in. And you know what? Once that land comes out of use for agriculture, there aren't any more property taxes paid on them because municipal districts don't pay it. So our local communities lose tax revenue once they flood those lands. We don't have that anymore. We're not sitting here saying we're not want to work together. And my communities have worked with Dallas. They've worked with the regions, and we're trying to come up with solutions. If we don't have a seat at the table, we can't have that happen. Think about this. The lakes that are built right now in Fannin County, one's been approved and the other's going to be approved. They're going to flood the farmland, right? Now, who decides what happens, whether you can put a boat dock on that, whether you can have trees around it, whatever. It's not anybody that is elected by the communities of Fannin County. And I don't think that's fair. My folks live on Lake Palestine. It's a Neches River Authority. At least they can go to the governor who appoints the board members or to their senator to say, hey, they're not treating us right around here. We don't have a say. This will give us a say. And if this does not pass, and I think it should stay on, please commit to us, Mr. Larson, and the rest of you, to respect our property rights, respect our say. If it wasn't for Thump Witchers and those citizens they've had tears and they've cried and they said, if you stand in their home and you know it's going to be flooded, taken from them, that's why we're upset about this. It's not because we don't care about
Representative
Texas.
Anderson, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes,
Phillips,
sir.
gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative Phillips. It's very interesting that when it was suggested that because of some members were saying that in the previous amendment that there was a three-quarter standard level as opposed to, say, simple majority, and when that was suggested, it fell on deaf ears.
Right. It was
That
suggested, let's just have a 50%. Our region, this region wants to say, I'm in 2 regions. And unfortunately, the one with Fannin County, I'm in Region C, so this wouldn't even apply to that county. We've already been run over. We've already been smushed into the ground. We've already been laughed at and taunted and said, we're going to do this. And they've not treated people well always. Sometimes they have. And we're confused about it. We're dealing with 2 different entities building 2 different lakes. They don't have the money to hire law firms to make sure that they're following the law correctly. It's just tough on us. And that's all we're asking is for assistance. This will help at least one of my counties have a say in it.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Would you agree, Representative Phillips, that the fact that changing that standard to simple majority fell on deaf ears speaks volumes, that there is no real intent to try and find a reasonable solution here, that it's might makes right? Would you agree with that?
I would. This is 2/3. Understand, let's think about this. So I've got a widow lady that owns a place. You know, we're going to take this property. You better take this money, otherwise you're going to have to sue us and go to court. So these widows are giving up, then they don't have any place to go. But that's okay because you're saying you're going to compensate them, right? You're not compensating them because they don't know enough. The wealthy landowners are going to wait around and they're going to get maximum money for their property. So think about these are citizens we're talking about. Farmers, ranchers, widows. We're just asking for.
And would you agree that Representative Simpson's amendment gave a reasonable standard and a reasonable format to debate these issues and provide for reasonable compensation?
Yes, sir. 2/3 is reasonable.
Would you also agree that if we're talking about land and water now, that we'll be talking about land, that we'll be talking about forestry, we'll be talking about livestock? I mean, if a larger...
Well, those cows will be gone, the crops will be gone, and in rural Texas it will be continuing to go away. Now, the question is, one of these days the shoe's going to be on the foot. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's going to be over minerals. Maybe it's going to be other things that we're going to need that we don't know about. We need to think about how we're treating those that are in the minority here just because you're in the majority. We got to work through this, members.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Sheets to close.
Mr. Speaker, members, I won't beat a dead horse. I'll just let you know the amendment that we're considering is my amendment to strike Mr. Simpson's amendment. So if you are opposed to Mr. Simpson's amendment, I'm asking that you vote yes with me on my amendment, which will strike his amendment. Please vote yes. Move passage.
Question occurs in the adoption of the Sheets amendment. Strict enforcement and a record vote has been requested by Mr. Simpson.
Strict enforcement. Strict enforcement.
Clerk will ring the bell. Please vote from your desks. Strict enforcement has been requested. Please vote from your desk. You'll have plenty of time. Have all members voted? Have all voted? Strict enforcement, please vote from your desk. Please vote from your desk. Please vote from your desk, Mr. Keogh. Have all voted? There being 77 ayes and 59 nays, the amendment is adopted.
You keep playing where you shouldn't be playing, and you keep thinking you'll never get burnt. Ha! I just found me a brand new box of matches. Yeah, it's called the Independent Movement. And what they know you ain't had time to learn. These boots are made ready, Texas independence? Start walking. Ba-ba-ba-bum, 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 ba-ba-ba-bum.